Thanks for checking out SYMFONI on YouTube. Please be sure to subscribe and like our videos for updates.
Now, talking of unity, we are at a point now where there's this mutual suspicions among the ethnic nationalities that constitute the body called Nigeria. We've seen formation of different regional groups. They have been meeting in unison and separately, all talking of the Nigerian project. Now, how do you think you describe the present state of Nigeria in terms of the harmonious nature of the different nationality groups?
Well, the state of a nation is fractured, much fractured. There are people who are almost in a state of despair about the Nigeria project. But when I talk to them, I say to them, look, the world has seen worse, maybe not exactly in the way that ours, because every particular project has its peculiarities, but the world has seen countries that have gone through terrible times get their act together. But there are things that must be done. It just doesn't happen by wishful thinking, by dreaming it, by praying and all of those things. No. It must be systematic engagement of citizens who understand what greater good lies for the country. Now, if you look at the ethnic nationality pugilists, as I call them, going after the other, you just see why leadership matters. And Nigeria is fractured the way it is because of a failure, complete failure of leadership. The kind of things that leaders talk about over a table. There's a myth in Nigeria called the Kaduna Mafia. And I happen to have studied very closely the origins of that whole phenomenon.
And whether it existed in real terms.
Well, yeah, it was a myth, obviously. But what it was really was that back in those days, there were some serious-minded people who lived in Kaduna around a certain a square mile or two. And when there are challenges, they generally get together and talk about these challenges. And then they call on that group of people in Lagos, and then they talk about these things. And they find some common ground that fixes the problem and everybody moves on. And so because their influence was such, journalism found a tag for them. I think it was Nduko or Noam in the Punch at that time that actually created the phenomenon or myth or idea of a Kaduna Mafia. So Nigeria doesn't have that, unfortunately, anymore. Seasoned, well-thinking people. I mean, people forget the role that a smarter, higher bureaucracy played in the way that Nigeria went through and solved the problem of the conflict of 1967 to the end of the Civil War 3 years later, 1970. But today you look and you see people who are supposed to be leaders not even able to do the kinds of things that prevent these issues from even being seen on the surface. Because these issues are always going to be latent. Where you have leadership, they sort these things out and it doesn't become, but the kind of leaders, I hate to call them leaders, the kind of people who have power today are the kind of people who actually exploit those things in hope that they can get their advantage out of those fractions. And they have brought us to this
So instead of mending
it, they take
they are further widening
they're widening it, yes. The cleavages, deep cleavages that have been built in Nigeria. And again, one of the things that surprised me, but that should not surprise me, the current political class in Nigeria is completely anti-intellectual, even if you have a few academics amongst them. But it's a completely anti-intellectual class. So they can't take reasoning that people who are thoughtful have put forward. Everything happening in Nigeria was predicted. People have written books about 25 years ago that where we are today that we'll get there. Americans even.
You rightly pointed out the way like minds gather, perhaps in a form of elite consensus basis.
Yes.
And there's the absence of that now, you say.
There is. And this is really the task before us. My last book, from experience, not academic research or anything, from my experience, because I've tried to be active.
Practical.
The people who, say, okay, politics is dead. No, I said no. My citizen's duty is to be active. And I've been active. And I crystallized these experiences into a book that was titled Why Not? That looks at citizenship, looks at creeping fascism and the criminal hijack of politics in Nigeria, but more importantly, looks at state capture. Because Nigeria is suffering from a terrible state of state capture. But part of what has happened to us, sadly, is that the process of state capture has materialized public life. That is to say, a group of people have captured the Nigerian state in which there is systemic corruption in government aimed at material benefit of those individuals rather than service to society for the advance of the common good of all. This has brought the wrong kind of people into politics.
And there's not been adequate or commensurate counter.
Absolutely. And that is why the project on ground now must be to stop this class of people. Nigerian political class is a complete disgrace to the Nigerian people. And they have to be stopped. If they're not stopped now, there will be no Nigeria.
You at the initial stages, it's called the people, gathering of the people. So
Yes.
you believe the people have to gather.
They have to gather.
Organization is key.
Yes,
Who
very
will
key.
provide the drive, the leadership?
Yes. And you know, this organization thing, and here I'll drift as an academic towards theory for a few seconds. You know, part of the movement that led to the founding of the APC came out of a lecture I gave here in Abuja, a leadership newspaper annual lecture of I don't know how many years ago on political parties. It is tragic that because half of the leaders of the opposition, or more than half of the main leaders of the opposition, were all sitting there. And I tried to explain to them what political parties are about. I went back to Roberto Michel's 1911 book on political parties. I went to the Iron Law of Oligarchy and all of that. How do you then ensure that when you build a party, you forestall those kinds of things that damage the possibilities of political parties being the basis for building a great state? We have violated all of it. We need to begin afresh. So we begin to teach new sets of people what politics really is about. It's about pursuit of immortality as a person by making the lives of people better. It's about impact. But our politics today doesn't look at that. It looks at how you can use state capture to grab more. And sometimes people don't know what they're grabbing more for. And misery dwells out there. Look, forget the numbers, which are all there. You know, poverty capital of the world, the
Unemployment rate.
the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation study that shows that in a few years, Nigeria and Congo, DRC, whatever, will provide the world 40% of its most miserable people. And you can just go on and on the numbers that make it such an embarrassment to be living in Nigeria today. And yet, in the middle of all of this, politicians, all they see to talk about is jumping from one party to another, jumping, who, 2023.
They don't understand the
purpose of the state, the purpose of politics, and the enormity of the problem facing Nigerian people. Look, the hunger on the streets is real. I can feel it, I can touch it, literally. But for that to be the state of the ordinary person in Nigeria, and for politicians to be carrying around the way they are carrying on, my goodness, this begs for judgment. And there will be judgment. Let's not make
on
any
earth or in heaven?
All of them.
Okay.
Judgment of conscience, judgment of history, and ultimately the judgment of God will visit this class of political actors.
Perhaps we wouldn't want a situation where the people want to pass judgment by themselves.
They may. Don't rule it out. Throughout history, people have finally passed judgment. Look at what happened to Nicolae Ceausescu on the streets in Romania. And you can go on and on about leaders who thought that the world was at their feet, who were, slaughtered on the streets by the people because of how they have put them through.
But we don't get to that place here.
I hope we don't.
We
but
believe we have persons with right reason. And those that appear to be taking advantage of this mass disorientation, disenchantment, some champions that emerge from nowhere, especially those that are giving out this or leading the agitation for secession. Nnamdi Kanu in the southeast, Sunday Igboho in the southwest. And if you see the mass followership, it tells you that perhaps the people are looking elsewhere.
Just that people are frustrated.
For leadership.
Yes. But it's not the best thing for them. I tell you, one of the theses that I'm trying to prove is that many of the things that gain currency in Nigeria, which Nigerian politicians play up on and put forward, usually are against the best interest of the same people that are supposed to be trying to do their, I have a series of them. I probably will do a book someday about them. Recently, I analyzed one or two, and people were amazed. I said, look at the problem of revenue allocation in Nigeria. They say, restructure the country, people are fighting. You see, those people want to take away what we were getting. This is. Do you know that revenue is actually have never made anybody rich. No country has become rich from revenues. Instead, revenues tend to create the things we talk about as Dutch disease and all the problems of economic management. But even more importantly, if you look at a poor man who has won a lottery, check 10 years later, he's poorer than he was when he won the lottery. And this is what the Nigerian political class has done to Nigerians. So if the people really understand that what makes rich is production. I'll give you an example. I grew up in northern Nigeria. When I was a kid in those early days, and the beauty of the pyramids and all of that, this was an extremely productive part of our country. Today, you won't see any of those things because some politicians have used revenues to say to them, this is what we need, and they've killed production, and the people have become
and there's a struggle over revenue allocation.
Yeah, that is the problem. The people don't even know that does them more harm. In fact, what clever people have done in history is refuse the revenues and say, save those revenues as a future fund.
Like Norway.
Like Norway has done it. But let's not even go too far and look like those Europeans. Botswana. Between 68 and 1980, Botswana from diamond exports had the fastest growing economy in the world. What did Botswana do? He set up a future fund, saved most of that for generations. And because something that God put in the ground should belong to all generations of that country. A generation that takes it and consumes it now is a cursed generation. That's what Nigerians have done. People of Botswana have put it in investments so that 100 years, 200 years, their great-grandchildren will be enjoying the benefits of that diamond that God put in the ground.
Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala started that move in Nigeria with the excess crude oil account, but the pressure especially from the governors to have it shed, she couldn't hold.
Ngozi deserves a lot of credit for many things, but not that one. We started it before she came.
Okay.
We put so much pressure under President Obasanjo that started. I still recall an event in Ibadan at Premier Hotel, the Tribune. I had just made a strong statement pressuring President Obasanjo to make those kinds of savings. And my friends, the Commissioner for Finance, Lagos State, Wale Edu, came to me and said, how can you support that kind of thing? These people, they want to take our money. I said, Wale, even you should know better. If you take these revenues on behalf of Nigeria, invest them abroad, like a mutual fund, if 4% of the yield of that investment comes, if Lagos State's portion of it is X million, you keep getting those revenue dividends to that extent to Lagos State. But because our political class was into bring the money, share the gala, share the booze, we could not program an appropriate deployment of revenues such that we created a class that just frittered it away, bought private jets, did all kinds of things, and just made us poorer. Because more important than even the point of the revenues being frittered away is the fact that they created a culture that prevented people from wanting to work. And that made us even much poorer.
A rentier economy.
Rentier economy, you know. So we've got a problem that needs to be dealt with at the root. Politics, the triumph of politics is the death of Nigeria. Everything is pushed to politics. I was sharing with you about the new book that I'm working on, which is titled The Origins, Roots of Inequality. It's not about a Nigeria book. Globally.
Global perspective.
How countries became poorer and others became richer. And critical to it is how politics subverts economics. Politicians who are not clever in playing up to the moment make their people more miserable, make their people poorer. And these are the kinds of choices that they have made. Favorite example is Spain. Spain had so much revenues flowing into its accounts from colonial expansion. When Cortés landed in Latin America, the conquistadors shipped gold and everything back to Spain. Small countries around Spain, the Luxembourgs of this world, the Switzerlands of this world, the Netherlands of this world, they did not have that. They invested in their youth, in their next generation to make them more productive. Today, they are much, much wealthier than Spain. And that is the challenge that Nigeria is facing. We are making ourselves the laughingstock of Africa because we're not investing in our youth, in our young people to be extremely productive and therefore offer the continent leadership. And so we are retreating as a country. And that is a tragedy.
Just to try to link what you have just put on the table, two interesting factors there. Revenue not being a blessing because those that will spend it, it won't be spent on the people. That's one. And the other one, attention on production, because apart from expanding the economic base, it will also help the government in other ways. But I want your comment on this secessionist agitations. You rightly said perhaps not the right people to drive it, but faith appear to have trust this leadership on them, and they're generating mass followers.
They're just responding to the frustration of the moment. And so in that frustration, they gather around certain kinds of leaders. There are many historic parallels of that. The question is, ultimately, do these things make us better off or worse off? But if you had a serious political class that was having public conversation that is rational, and people will understand where these things will lead them and see greater benefits in alternative tracks, the politicians will persuade them of different ways of doing things for their own good in their best interest, and they will follow different tracks. But you see, again, it goes back, one of my favorite subject areas is institutions and institution building. When the Americans were framing their constitution, they made it clear that anybody who wanted to secede can secede. What does that do? It puts pressure on political actors to make sure that they give such value to the people that the idea of secession never looks attractive. But they know that if they want to, yes, they know that if they want to, they can secede. But we are here when you say to people, you can't go, you can't go. What are you saying to them? Be slaves? Because you say somebody you can't go and you're not treating them right, you're saying to them, we want you to be slaves. Well, at least CNN has run a series on modern slavery. And this generation, this age, nobody will tolerate slavery. And if you can't govern, and you say to people, we must keep you, then you are saying, we want you to be slaves. And the world will not tolerate slavery in the 21st century. So the challenge is for political actors to govern better so that people will not talk secession. It is the frustration of poor governing that is making people talk secession.
To what extent would constitutional amendment
It will help
deal with these problems?
It will help, but it's not the final solution. The most important solution is having real politicians in politics. I mean, not fair weather people.
Not the operators.
Yes. So, because as leaders, true leaders, not power grabbers, they will know how best to navigate in the common good of the people, therefore reducing the possibilities of that level of frustration that leads people to wanting to secede. So if you train politicians, and there are movements, I see people like Obi Ezekwesili and others developing a school to train the next generation of politicians, fix politics.
Governance and
we've got to do that, because most of these fair weather guys who are running around calling themselves, giving them titles, are not going to be able to govern this country. They cannot govern. They don't have the capacity. They don't have the mental discipline to govern.
But day by day, they appear to be having firmer grip on the apparatus of power.
That's what leads to ultimate failure. Because that's the only reaction. Let's grab more power to tell them put them down, put them down. Eventually they collapse. In every society in history it has happened. Then you see the king's head on the chop. England. Go anywhere. When in France, Marie Antoinette says, they can't find bread, which is our situation now, we can't find bread. Why don't they eat cake? One day the king's head will go on the chop. So we must learn from history. We must understand what is going wrong in our country, and we must act. In the book, Why Not? My biggest criticism was not even of the politicians. It was of the middle class, who I call the complicit middle, who, out of their inability to become citizens, become complicit in their own undoing. The complicit middle. Leave them, those politicians, God will judge them. Well,
why finding comfort within the limited
they beat their small comfort zone.
Resources they have found themselves.
If they can take enough bribe to buy a SUV, doesn't matter that the roads are not tarred. They can get one house. I wish I could tell 2 or 3 stories that explain the folly of that thinking. One of them comes from Somalia, and the person who told this story is the current vice president in my presence.
I've
heard that story. He and I spoke at the 60th birthday of Pastor Paul Adefarasi. And he told the story, and I told the Liberia story, and I remember saying,
okay, is it the Liberian story or Sierra Leone story where judges were IDP, were
Yes.
populating IDP
All of
camps in
them.
Nigeria.
The same thing happened as in both Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Somalia. In the case of the vice president, was I think the story he told, former Supreme Court judge or so, who was in the IDP camp looking macheted, begging for a bowl of rice. He's a guy who was escorted by Cyrene some years before.
Months
in the
before.
in the case of Liberia, the Liberian ambassador to Nigeria during the Liberian Civil War was my schoolmate in the US when grad school. His name is Sirenius IV. One day, Sai just packed his load and said he was going back to Liberia. He went back. Soon his Mercedes was there. He was live, was going. And when the Civil War came and he was posted to Lagos, and I was living in Victoria Island at the time, the Liberian embassy was there on a dejo, and we would sit together in the evenings. He says to me, Pat, you know, your country amazes me. I mean, you are pouring Nigerian blood like water through the gutters of Liberia to save us, and we are very grateful. You are spending Nigerian money like it's going out of business to save us from Liberia, and we're very grateful. But what I don't understand, Pat, is why can't you people learn from what got us there? So when I left you in Bloomington, running home to go and enjoy the good life, and I got there, the Mercedes came, the this came, and the politicians were misbehaving. And I said, this is wrong, go. But I said, if I talk now, I will lose my Mercedes. So I kept quiet. Then a group of soldiers came and chased them out. And they got worse. And if I talk now, I will lose my house. So I kept quiet. One day, going on the streets, things have gone so bad. Somebody stopped me, hey, give me the key of that Mercedes. You came out and said, thank God, oh, it's only Mercedes they took. Thank God, I go home. At least I still have a house. And one night you are sleeping, they go, hey, Commandante, you won't use this house, pack out. I said, you Nigerians are heading there.
So the message is, accept the people, the middle class, join forces with other progressive elements to ensure that the country is put on the right track. Then it's just a matter of time.
A matter of time. Just a matter of time. No question in my mind.
Many of them sitting back watching us wonder, how do we become parts? Forming of alliances, how relevant is it? How do they begin to exert more influence, show more interest in the governance process of our
Become a citizen, look at groups that are working for change. You know, one of the things, if you are in a political party, maybe one of the big ones, and you are saying, let's do the right thing, they say, this man, is he still part of the party? Even till today in England, it's the backbenchers that save the party. The ones who are saying, this our party is not doing it right. We must hear more voices from within. You are all there, keeping quiet because you don't want to lose your Mercedes. Wait till you lose your hands on the streets.
Let's look at the economy. You've dealt with the issue of revenue, just like the oil curse. You equate to revenue curse. But let's look at the PIB that was passed on Thursday by the National Assembly. After 20 years, check out history. I see a lot of interest move around the PIB, national, local, international, foreign. I mean, host communities, the contending forces within the Nigerian political economy, and of course, the international economic interest. How will you describe this new move by the National Assembly? And perhaps the second time it's passed because it was passed by the 8th Assembly, but the President did assent. But most likely, the President will give his nod now.
Yes. Well, you see, it's never too late, but it's pretty late. So, better late than never, as the saying typically goes. But you see, it's coming at a time when oil is increasingly irrelevant for the future. As you and I know, about 9 months or so ago, Total was projecting, doing his scenarios, and decided to write down his crude oil holdings in Canada to zero value. Well, about 18 years from now, it was 18 and a half years from when they made this thing. So in 17 plus years, in the calculation of one of the world's great energy companies, Total, crude oil will be worth nothing to them. Now, unfortunately, in all these years, we have prevented the investments that could have gone into the oil sector from going in because of the games we played with the PIB. And let us hope that what has come can provide some incentives for some of the communities to feel more comfortable, investors to feel safer, But between you and I, most of their investment interests have moved off fossil fuels. But it is possible if we harvest some there that local derivatives, and when we think the oil and gas sector now, we must think beyond just taking crude and taking out. We must think about how we create a business pipeline around oil, indigenous participation, and technology, such that even when the world is not looking at crude oil for fueling cars, we are using derivatives of hydrocarbons for economic advance for our people. This should be the kind of emphasis that we have as we go into the PIB era, if and when it is accented to. We've lost time, but we need to move on. I think that as we are today as a country, what our focus must be is how do we manufacture based on our latent comparative advantage? How do we take our factor endowments, even hydrocarbons, and think of goods that will come out of them that we can export and dominate that value chain? You know, this conversation is one, there used to be a chief economist of the World Bank here in Abuja years ago, a German fellow called Volker Treichel. And he would listen to me talk about what is now generally seen in structural economics as latent comparative advantage, and how we can then build industrial policy just around those endowments. And he was fascinated when he returned to Washington that the then chief economist at the World Bank, Chinese economist called Justin Lin, was actually driving similar kinds of ideas and explaining China's economic ascendancy based on it. I think that the work of Paul Collier, looking at how China went dramatically up in manufacturing, which makes the point, his favorite illustration, which I have adopted and I ask him, talk with him about all the time, how a local government in China, even without great endowments for that matter, managed to end up producing 70% of all the buttons that are used on the planet Earth. Our political class has to become more serious about how our endowments are translated into production hubs. That's how you ensure that jobs are provided to the people. That's how you ensure that there's economic growth. And when people are engaged, building up their happiness, you know, you make progress. Look, let me tell you my big problems with Nigerian political class. And by the way, I am part of it. That's it where, technically, you know, it's people who know what to do are around. Civil servants, even as much as we curse them today. I remember campaigning in 2007, and the Emir of Gombe, you know, you traditionally call on the traditional ruler, governor,
courtesy calls, paying homage.
I was making these usual statements, thinking, okay, when I finish this traditional ruler will say the usual things, and I will leave and go to the next meeting. And then when he started speaking, I stopped. He said, I'm not saying you won't win this election, or I'm not discouraged. Please, I hope you win. But I'm saying, even if you don't win, please don't stop running. Say, until someone like you or you become president of Nigeria, Nigeria will not make progress. Shut up. MS don't talk like this. And this was the Emir of Gombe.
They are usually conservative.
Very, yes. So I said, he said, look, these politicians are not serious people. They don't have the time for work. They come to the office by 11 o'clock. Contractors come, their friends come. They go off to party stuff. At 6 p.m., they write, bring forward, bring under, and they go off. He says, no country can make progress with these kinds of actors. And so I was in such shock when we left him. We went to visit the Gombe Elders Council, former managing director of AfriBank. I think Abdullahi was chair. So the meeting was in his home. And I said to him, look at what I have just heard. He said, yes, he should know. He's a former federal permanent secretary. I said, Abajo.
Repository of knowledge.
Yes. So he knows the mess the country is. And he knows the politicians are
I've
responsible.
encountered some of them, and you're
know?
always amazed over the depth, about the depth of their knowledge.
Yeah.
But the system will not allow them to thrive.
Yeah.
The political strangulation and state capture will not allow them to thrive. So now, let's look at the debt problem. Is increasing, strangulating as it were, but more debts are coming.
You know,
but the National Assembly is fast approving more requests for loan. Many are wondering if we are spending nearly 90% of our revenue earnings to service debt.
It's going to be 100%
very soon.
Yes.
Now, where will it put the country?
Oh, you know, the question is, who is advising who? What's the purpose? What's the goal of the politician? Who's making those decisions? And all of that. There are people who argue that this current political class actually want to bankrupt Nigeria before they go. They will just leave you sitting on this mountain of debt that will just make you, China will just hold you like, you know. Then, but I think that's too pessimistic. I think that's too pessimistic.
Because they have nowhere to run to.
Well, you don't, you know, they have enough houses in Dubai to leave you and go
Where
there.
they will become second-class citizens.
Well, they don't see that. That's the point. They don't see. But I think more than that, more seriously, I think that what is happening is that we exaggerate the possibilities of tomorrow's revenue from oil. And we think that with those revenues, we can amortize the kinds of, and many of them are in no options game. So what do? We can't pay salaries, and we need to pay salaries. We must borrow.
So therefore
kind of thinking.
borrow.
Yeah. But you see,
there's what they call it in philosophy, deductive reasoning.
But you see, what is the real problem is that there is a total failure of public finance in Nigeria. They believe that the only way you can run things is budget. And then you get revenues that either come from oil receipts or from internally generated revenue. So in fact, you harass more people to get into IGR at a time when they can hardly feed, even though there's, if you do all the, you know, tax to GDP ratio and all of those kinds of things, yes, we don't pay enough taxes. But if you think taxes in terms of the other things that you provide for yourself, we pay more taxes than Americans pay. Because
Inadvertently.
Yes.
Because basic amenities are provided by citizens.
And all of those things. And then even beyond that, that's the one tax that we've not calculated well. I was once interested in doing a study on that, but never got enough motivation to move ahead, is the average middle class or even well-off Nigerian is taxed by just being a human being. I mean, everybody in your community comes to you. Their children can't pay school fees. When you give all of those, it's tax you're paying. These are the things the state could have done. But the average American doesn't deal with that.
You take over social safety nets,
yes.
provision.
So there's a problem with our conversation around expanding the tax base. But these are realities we have to deal with. What I am particularly worried about is how we do not creatively engage the fact that at no point in human history has there been more capital available to the human race. But that capital is not coming to Nigeria. It's not coming to Nigeria because we don't run Nigeria well, and so they look at Nigeria and say, we don't go to Nigeria.
There's even capital flight out of
Nigeria. So that if the political class recognizes that, I mean, just take a simple thing. Look, and this, as bad as things are, check where the presidential fleet is right now. At any point in time, I don't mean just now, any time. President is gone with one plane, vice president is gone with one plane, senate president is gone, deputy senate president is gone with one plane. It's as if a Nigerian political class,
sometimes family members,
yes, completely isolate themselves from the reality of the Nigerian condition. If we could just make the place a reflection of our reality and govern well, govern with prudence, govern with whatever, and showcase this to the world. Look, most infrastructure today into this world is not coming from your budget. Of course, the Australians have been leaders in showing how private capital provides infrastructure. I mean, a couple of years ago, I was guest of the government of Australia, traveling around the country, talking to ministers, giving lectures, and talking to private sector people. Most of the rail lines in Australia were originally built by private mining companies, and then became public assets, according to the evolution of that. But above and beyond what they've done in Australia, the French economist Thomas Piketty is perhaps now the leading authority in the world on capital. I mean, his volume on capital and then capital and inequality are interesting reads. And part of the point that Thomas Piketty makes is capital is awash. The problem is that it's in a few hands. Piketty being, as some people tag him, the new Marx, focuses more on how to redistribute that capital. I've been a professor of entrepreneurship, focus on how ideas can creatively attract that capital.
And there'll be a meeting point.
And they will come. So I think that if we get the right kinds of people who merit, look at the Securities and Exchange Commission in Nigeria. No ideas coming from the place. It is SEC that should create the conditions that will enable that kind of capital.
But we have seen portfolio investors divesting, and it has led to crash of the value of stocks in our stock market.
This is because we don't realize how important it is to build strong institutions.
Okay, now let me take you up on what you said, and quite interesting to me, very interesting, the issue of private capital delivering on critical infrastructure in Nigeria. Is public capital not enough grossly, a heavy resort and reliance on borrowings?
Well, first of all, public capital is a lot less efficiently used. So if there's going to be a road that goes from here to wherever, you either mortgage the country to some company or whatever, because the political actors would have cut in and cut in and cut in and cut in their percentages. If you just ask the same company to build a road, collect tolls for a specific time, there is a monitoring system, civil society, everybody is involved, they will build the road, they will maintain the road. I remember Fashola, when he went to works, he was talking about the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway and how it became. Look, as late as 1993, during the June 12 crisis, a group of friends of mine and I, who had founded the Concerned Professionals, wanted to go to Ibadan to have a meeting with Chief Bola Ige. Toll gate to toll gate, Lagos-Ibadan, it took us 45 minutes. Toll gate to toll gate. In fact, when we reached, on our way back, when we got to Lagos, one of us stopped and said, look, you guys should talk to your drivers that are driving too fast or whatever. Today you go to Ibadan, it takes you 2-3 hours. But the point I was going to was that Fashola made a statement that when that expressway was built, these junction points, the people who built them said they must be replaced every 5 years or something like that. So in 40 years, they've not been done once. That's the nature of public sector curation of public assets. But if you have private infrastructure, and these people have to make sure that their roads are in top condition, collect these tolls and all of that, then these kinds of things will not happen.
But you know the counter-argument.
Yes.
That they will be driven by profit motive, public service will be neglected.
There's nothing wrong with
profit. Poor masses, that's the counter-argument.
That is not
poor
even,
masses will be
it is not even
made
true.
to bear will be milked to death.
Let me give you a counter-argument to that counter-argument. When we used to have NITEL, it is because the poor masses have to be protected from these crazy private sector Shylocks. I went to a sabbatical. I spent 1996-97 at the Harvard Business School writing the book Managing Uncertainty. I arrived Boston, and I got a house in Cambridge on a street called Elm Street. And I was thinking, oh, how do I get myself a telephone? And I saw a phone booth around the corner. So I went to the phone booth and called the phone company. And I said, please, where are you located? He said, oh, what do you want from us? Why do you want to come and see us? We can tell your location, but just to, I said, look, I've just moved into a house on Elm Street, and I want to get myself a phone. So you don't need to come to this. I said, what do you mean you don't need to come? He said, have you ever had a phone number in the US? I said, yes, I went to grad school here. I have my old phone numbers. I even spent some time in Washington. I also have a phone number. I said, okay, just call this number, say you want a phone, and give your old number. If they check and your credit was good from the times you were in those two places, there must be a connection phone in the house you just rented. By a certain time, I don't know what time of the day it was, pick it up and see if there's a dial tone. At the time when I picked it up, there was dial tone. They gave me my phone number and everything. And I went, oh my God. First thing I did, I quickly called my family in Nigeria. Now, Nigeria was trying to protect the poor man.
In quotes.
In quotes. But for me to call Nigeria, it was so much cheaper from the US than the poor man being protected in Nigeria to call me. So I said to my family, don't call me, I call you. So in my excitement, of course, I called my family twice a day and all of that. And then my first phone bill came. It was only $500 and something I paid. The next one came. One morning, I was coming back from church. Phone was ringing. I rushed, grabbed the phone. I said, hello, yes. He said, oh, this is Sprint. I think that was a long-distance company I was using. He said, we noticed you've been making many phone calls to Nigeria. I said, these people have come because I'm Nigerian. They want to say I'm 419. I said, yes. Is there a problem with that? They said, no, there's no problem. But because you are such a high volume user, want to reduce your tariffs by 50%. I said, no, Christmas has not come.
Economies of scale.
Yes. That's how MTN and Co. came here. And within a few years, a SIM card that was how much became zero. Scale economies eventually makes it cheaper for the poor person.
In the long run.
In the long run.
Okay, now let's do politics. Let's leave economics a bit. You've tested it and you know what it feels like. 2023 is nearby, just about 19 months to election or less. What do you make out of all the moves?
I'll ask anybody who is serious not to take 2023 serious until we reform the process. The electoral process in Nigeria is a complete and total farce. I've participated in it. Okay? It just shows, in fact, that our political class does not have conscience or soul. The elections are not about following any due process. They're not about your popularity with the people or with anybody. They're about how you manage. When you say you're running for office, first thing people ask you is, how much money are you keeping for the army? How much are you keeping for police? How much are you keeping for INEC? I said, wait a minute. What do you mean by how much are you keeping? I said, look, my friend, that's the politics of it. Please. So
good enough, they don't keep for the media.
We need electoral process reform. First, we need to take on some basic constitutional reform issues. And not all this business of overemphasizing. Look, if the constitutional process was such that people who are closer to the grassroots get elected, then the people can hold them more accountable. You see, there's no difference between being the manager of a company and being the elected politician. The same fundamental things, the agency function. And if you go into economics and look at the agency function and managing the agency function and the problem of information asymmetry in managing those, you will see that unless we can make the citizen hold the politician to account on a continuing basis. You see, now when you talk about, for example, say, look, the government has run out of legitimacy. You say, yeah, we are legal, we are elected to go to 2023. Who told you that? There are two concepts that politicians should understand in Nigeria. As the legality, okay, whether you rigged it or not, okay, it is legally said that you won the election. See the contempt which Nigerian people say, National Assembly will review the Constitution. Everything you hear from most people is, who elected them? The average Nigerian does not think that he elected the politicians in office. And that's a tragic thing for our democracy. Now,
they lose legitimacy.
They lose legitimacy, precisely. People don't understand the concept of legitimacy. And those of them who want to understand it, you go and read Simon Martin Lipset in the First New Nation. Legitimacy is really what matters. In the parliamentary system, ensuring a maintenance of legitimacy is what makes it easy to quickly go to a vote of no confidence for a government in power. That's why I prefer the parliamentary system, by the way. But even in the presidential system, the provision of recall shows that the government doesn't have to go from day one to the official of 2023, 2027 or whatever.
Hand over it.
The people can recall a government. But because our electoral process does not work, the recall system has not worked. And so Nigerians must deal with these issues.
Even when it's backed by state power, recall system has never worked in Nigeria.
Now, people must say, let's deal with these issues before you go to another fast. That's called an election. I think this is a very important thing to deal with.
Do we have ample time? Consider, I said less than 20 months to election, because some people believe there are interests that will benefit if no election holds in 2020.
Of course, the reason that electoral reforms have always stalled in National Assembly is because there are interests that don't want reforms, that want to be able to manipulate elections. And those interests always seem to win over. But what does that do to our democracy? How does the world take us seriously? They know. The guys in Washington know better than you what has happened. I mean, I can tell you that every general election in Nigeria has been progressively worse since 1999. 99 was perhaps the best, but it wasn't that good.
Or maybe you come back to...
But because I was here at
the election.
Yeah. Oh, that one too, you know. So the world sneers at you. I was at a reception for want of decency, I shouldn't mention who I was at a reception in the British High Commission or somewhere, Deputy High Commission in Lagos. And some political affairs officer from one big embassy was joking about the joke that was the last election. And I can mention the Nigerian name. Onyema, the stock exchange guys, said to him, "Hey, but you guys said the election was good." And he laughed and said, "What do you want us to say?" I kind of drifted, away. So they make fun of us, and we think that because they have said, "Oh, it was okay." In '99, which was perhaps the best of the elections, here at the Hilton, we had what was called the U.S.-Nigeria Economic Summit Group, or whatever it was called, Society, U.S.-Nigeria Economic. Aliko Dangote was president, I was vice president. We hosted President Jimmy Carter, Colin Powell, and co to a dinner right here in Abuja, at the Hilton. And I asked President Carter what he thought of the election. The man could not talk.
That's 1999.
1999, that was the best that we've had.
So for him, it's better, imagine.
Yes. So one of the ambassadors who came with him, who used to be ambassador to Nigeria, Princeton Lyman, called me and said, "Pat, come, let me tell you what we saw." So, it's a shame, but we elect ourselves, fool
And
ourselves.
it appears even if the election holds again, it will still be the same pattern.
So why do we pretend that we're a democracy among ourselves?
But we can fix that.
We
Can we
can.
do that in the short term?
Well,
But we
we
expect that any moment from now, the National Assembly may pass the Electoral Act Amendment. Would that be enough?
It can be enough, but it's a starting point. Politics is the art of the possible. You get what you can now and you keep pushing. But let's not pretend that things are okay. Let's not pretend that anybody who shows up and say that INEC has declared him a winner, that he actually won any election. No, we must not. We must continue to stop pretending that is the truth.
Okay, perhaps the last issue to consider is press freedom, media regulation. There are two bills that are being amended in the National Assembly, National Broadcasting Act and Nigeria Press Council Act. The government is desirous of further regulating not just the conventional media, but extending hands now into the social media. They want the social media platforms to establish in Nigeria and pay taxes.
Well, sometimes I wonder why we are so ahistoric in our thinking. We've seen these things before. It's not the first time. Invariably, you drive the media on the ground. You get the social media, you can ban Twitter or whatever you want to do. Social media will go on the ground, and they will eventually be more dangerous to you. There's nothing that beats open, free engagement. Are people abusing those things? Absolutely, yes, they are. But there are ways. The American philosophy with freedom of expression is that in an open state of expression, ultimately the truth will come out from the swarming of ideas, and people are discerning enough to tell falsehood from truth. What you need to do is put machines in place to ensure that there is enough entry of alternative views. The German philosopher Jürgen Habermas defines democracy, defines modernity with what he likes to call rational public conversation. The conversations will have to get more and more rational. And the quality of public thought, the kind of thought leadership in the country will eventually begin to define what people turn to. And they will know that chaff is chaff. And that will lead us to where we're going, or should be going.
So what do you expect the government to do as it engages with Twitter over possible lifting of the suspension of the use of the platform in Nigeria?
You know, I mean, I think that if the government says to Twitter, look, we want you to regulate better the fact that some people are using this to abuse privileges, then the government must be completely open. Doesn't matter whether it is government that is doing it or the citizens doing it. Because government, I'm sorry to say, government is the biggest spreader of fake news in Nigeria. Governments. A governor starts a 5-kilometer road and for the rest of the year is singing about tunnel, let's be honest with ourselves, government is the biggest source of fake news in Nigeria. And so in response to that fakery, people are getting desperate in saying what is untrue. So if all of us increasingly behave, the unseen hand, that great unseen hand, which in economics, of course, we often talk about, but it goes beyond economics. Douglas North, who is perhaps one of the best thinkers on the subject of institutions and economic performance, of course, rightly won the Nobel Prize in economics for the work, comes back to the same unseen hand that ultimately comes together in a way that stronger institutions build the boundaries that allow people to behave in the appropriate context.